So yesterday, once we released the video, the tribute to Luke, one of the things that came out for me was the number of people that contacted me, either with words of encouragement or questions around the depression. When I talked about it, not that I didn't think much about it, but it was just kind of, an honest statement for me. But then it kind of was a little bit of an outpouring to me of people asking questions. And, the more I thought about it, I realized if we say it in the video, that a lot of people don't talk about depression. So I kind of felt like maybe now is the time to really kind of put it out there and talk about my experience from it. So maybe someone that has questions that's really unfamiliar with it, of maybe what it feels like for someone. Because I'm sure there's people asking, what was he going through? I don't think anybody's going to really know what he's going through. Even like James and Ben, who are as close to him as possible, they might know some of it, but what's going on inside someone they might not really know. But there's maybe a lot of people that can't wrap their head around how could maybe someone get there. So for me, I guess with my own dealings with it, I can maybe somewhat rationalize how he got there. So I guess I felt like, well, I could give my own accord, maybe educate people a little bit on what it's like from one person's point of view of depression. And if there's any way that can help out in this, maybe this is the way. So that's really where, for me, this is coming from to do this piece. So for me with depression, obviously I grew up with my mom having depression, her mom having depression, her mom having attempts at suicide. And, it was maybe talked about, but casually. It wasn't something yet really was talked about and dealt with. And then I was younger. I guess I recognized it because there was points where, I had thoughts of suicide when I was in my teens. And then for me, it was like, but the will to live was always much stronger when I had those thoughts. So I recognized at some point that, okay, I probably have similar issues with depression. And then it wasn't until I kind of got out of the house that I talked to people about it, or, was able to get my head around it more. Obviously working out was always an outlet. It channeled my thoughts and focus, and, just getting out on my own. Sometimes that was enough to kind of quell things, but it was always there, because I always knew it was, some things but you don't want to recognize it, because as soon as you recognize it, then you have to deal with it, right? I think that was always a hesitation for me, is because, it's easy to just keep chugging along. It's tougher to try to make a change, because that means you have to change something about yourself, and that's usually the tough part. But for me, I guess where I kind of really recognized it was more you're in moments of situations where it should be maybe super joyful, eventful, and you're just looking at the clock of how long until this is over with, and then for me, for the longest time, I thought maybe just something wrong with my personality. But as time went on and different things happened in life, and then started going to therapy and counseling, realized that it was just part of how depression manifests for me, of just being emotionally unengaged sometimes. So again, things that could bring you great joy, you're just all right, I don't feel anything from this. You're really a loss of feeling sometimes. And that's one of the things for me. For me, as I got older, one of the ways depression really manifests is it's just for me personally, is really fragmented thinking. So I always give the example, everyone knows I love cars, I buy and sell cars all the time. I have fun with it, but then there's times where maybe it's not a transactional thing, it's something I really wanted. And I go to do one thing, and just in a moment, I'll do the complete opposite. I have this weird impulsivity to do something different. I can't tell you why. There's no way I can wrap my head around why I did it. I just did it, and then I have this regret later. Could be later that day, could be days. And I had that with jobs in the past when I was younger, same thing, get a job I really wanted, and then just piss it off. Just because in a moment, I'll just be like, nope, don't want to do this. Don't know why. And I don't know if it was fear of being happy about something, not letting myself really be happy of whatever that is inside me that wouldn't let me feel and have those happy emotions, and just, do that impulsive thing. So, that's where I really kind of started recognizing there's probably something more than just a disconnect, that there's more going on. And then that's when, again, sitting with a therapist, which I still do to this day, where I can literally FaceTime her if I need to, and also with my wife. I mean, she was one of the first people to recognize, hey, I think you need to talk to someone. You're just disconnected. So, That's one great thing I always like appreciated my wife being able to recognize it and then say something to me instead of just be like, okay, I don't want an argument about this, but actually like engaging me on the situation. So
I think that it was the patience with him. It was the acceptance from the very, beginning, and I think that it was the being held accountable and it coming from a place in my heart and not my head, like really wanting better for you as, a person, as an individual, seeing you struggle with something and knowing, okay, I know how to help you, do that. Would you let me help you do that? And if you'll let me help you, we'll take this step, by step.
yeah, so for how to deal with depression, everyone's a little different, right? Because it manifests differently. Like for me, one of the way it manifests, like I said, it's very fragmented thought process sometimes, where can't carry something completely out. And also too, for me, sometimes, and this again, to talk about this, is I can see why people maybe wouldn't talk about stuff. I can have what I only would classify as like a delusion, right? Like, say you push me, or you bumped into me. And in that moment, instead of just being like, oh, okay, cool, I'll go through this whole scenario in my head of how this plays out. And this has happened with my wife before, and this is where kind of she's like, okay, something's not right. Where I get it in my head of that action was because of X, Y, and Z. And I play it out in my head like a movie to where it's so vivid and real in my mind, it becomes a reality. And then I start acting and feeling based off that. And that's where it's like, again, you get caught up with your thoughts like that. So it's tough. So dealing with stuff like that sometimes is hard. It's like, one, a support system around you who can maybe recognize those type of actions or emotions that you're having. Two, like again, work and the gym have always been ways, again, I'm not saying it's right for everybody, but for me, like I'll do a million things at once. And a lot of it is because it just keeps things channeled and focused into one direction. So that's why maybe a lot of times I bury myself with work a little bit, because I can just channel that energy for now and kind of quiet those kind of random thoughts or that like fragmented thinking. Training's the same way, because in that moment for that hour, I can just put all my effort into one spot and I don't, my mind doesn't wander. And actually, in kind of like that delusional thought process I get sometimes, it's actually helped me in training because I'll visualize stuff. But then when it's not good, I mean, that's where it runs. And that's where I think for people, if they're ever wonder like, well, how could someone get to that point? Well, if you got those thoughts trapped in your head and they become delusional to yourself where you can't trust your own thought, stuff like what happened with Luke could happen, because you're not getting those thoughts out of your head to someone else to say, hey, can you sense check this? I do this with my wife sometimes. I'll be like, hey, can I talk to you tonight? I'll text her during the day. I'll be like, can I talk to you tonight about something? I'm like, it's not bad. I just need to bounce this off you. And I'll be like, all right, this is how I was thinking about this. What, like, kind of reset me. And, I don't mean to put that on her, but I know I have that ability to be able to just even text her in a moment and be like, all right, I know this isn't like the right way of thinking. Like, can we sit and talk about this? Because at least then I can get it out.
Like every single one of us has trauma or a trauma that you don't leave this earth without some sort of trauma. Some of us a little bit more, unscathed than others, okay? Your level is different, from my, level. And I think that when we first got together, he really, really wanted, a relationship, like a place or a person that he could call, home. And I was the first person that I think really met him and saw him for him and said, I'm okay with that. Like I'm one of those people who accepts people for who, they are, coming from a very judgment-free, zone. You are who you are. I love you,
Well, I guess I would also say too, having a therapist is crucial. I know a lot of people, when they think therapy, it's a bad thing. It's a neutral party. Like my wife and I also go to marriage counseling. There's no problem in our marriage, but it's just, there's things that maybe you wouldn't want to put on each other, that if you have just a neutral audience that you can bounce it off that has no opinion of the situation, it's like a mediator, so that way you're never adversarial, that you can talk through things. So that's kind of the way I look at like my therapist as, is I can say these things and I'm going to get an assessment of it without a judgment of it. Yeah, so I mean, recognize it. Sometimes you might not recognize it. Like, you'd think with me having it, I would be able to pick it up in someone. For him, I think he did a really good job of hiding it. Now, there's probably some times where if you were a fly on the wall and always watching him, there's probably some point where he, would withdraw, like me going into a show. Sometimes I have to like really prep myself, because with me too, like social anxiety of it is part of it, because I guess there's probably part of me that thinks that people are going to see through whatever armor I've built and realize that like this is going on with me. So there's times I have to like build myself up to do something, and there's days when I get home I have to like just go like in a dark room and be away from everybody, even if it's for 20 minutes, just to kind of like from a sensory standpoint, let everything die down.
Again, very upfront about when I need, my breaks, and knowing when I've reached, my end. I only have so much, bandwidth as well. And I'm very vocal, to him as well. Like, okay, if you're going to break down today, I'm going to need you to pick a different day, because I've got some other things happening for this day. But no, he's even picked up on some of like the tools, and will tell me when he sees me headed, down in a spiral, he'll like, okay, she's going to need, her break.
With him, he was always very worried about, making sure that he was doing a good job. So he might have had a really good way of putting on a front, and because again, like working out, like you build up this armor, like, and that's part of like, that's the thing, right? Like, he's a big, strong guy, a bodybuilder, but not saying that's a sign of it, but it's because everything he did built up this kind of character and armor that, he didn't have a problem. And again, for him, that probably was a way of protecting himself. And whatever he saw in himself that he was afraid other people would see, he did the opposite to put that out there that, hey, everything's good, I'm happy. Where inside he might have felt like this little kid. Where there's times like for me, that's where I have these incidents where I forget where I'm at in life, and I just go back to a different point in time, because again, you get in these situations where your feelings and thoughts betray you. I mean, it's like, it's tough, Yeah, I mean, I think the views on mental health have changed a lot, and some for the good, some for the worse, right? Because probably back in the day, all there were mental health facilities, and, unfortunately, I think it was just pushing away a problem. Like my mom's brother, who it was just, hey, put him on lithium, let him sleep in the bedroom, and okay, now we got the weird uncle who goes a little kooky from once in a while, instead of saying, hey, there's a problem, get him in therapy, talk about it as a family. So, when those mental health facilities went away, a lot of those people got pushed out. So a lot of those people are, your homeless population, that got pushed to the streets. So that's a whole different topic of, where it's not being dealt with. But then you take maybe the positive side of social media and media now, where people are willing to talk about it, and there's a platform to talk about it, where before there wasn't a platform and people weren't willing. So I think things have changed for the positive in that people will talk about it now. There's outlets to talk about it, and then you have a situation with, here's this beloved person who passes. Now it brings it more to the forefront of, now again, it does bring up a lot of questions of why, where people can't wrap their head around it, but like today, it's creating a conversation around it that maybe wouldn't, everyone who works here wouldn't know this about me. It's not something I really publicize. Like, I don't know, maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, I finally had to sit with Singerman and be like, hey, just so you know, like sometimes when I get in these moods or, I'm like in this kind of mind space, this is why. I felt like I owed it to him as business partner and friend to be like, hey, you need to know this about me. It's not something I talk about, but so just so he was able to recognize things at times. So in that regard, like I say, this is where things have moved forward, because it's not so much a, before it was like a, you know, I guess what's the best word I'm looking for? It's taboo to talk about. Where now I don't think so much, but I just think it's getting people comfortable with it, that it's okay. I mean, we all want to be a superhero, but superheroes also have some weaknesses, and it's okay that you do. So definitely with, you know, African American culture, it's okay, my wife's family is much bigger than mine. So I have much more exposure and family members that are African American now than I do white. And it is an interesting, well, in that family, it's like an interesting duality, right? Because you have, they're Southern African American. So Southern Black, Alabama, gone through hell and back. And it is very like faith-based, right? So, like I say, she has an uncle who passed away who killed himself. He had bad depression problems. And, you know, the family just kind of like, oh, you know, didn't really deal, same thing, just pray about it. And unfortunately, he ended up killing himself, and it affected the family. I mean, my mother-in-law, still to this day, it's a rough thing for her.
You know, like my family and how, you know, we handled it. My mom's mom, you know, that the older side of my family, it was still very much like, you just don't talk about these things, you just don't. And I saw what that did. As a kid, I recognized what that did to the household. As a kid, everything is very black and white. You know, you're very much like, well, I don't get it. Why don't you just, you know, why don't we just talk about this? And I just knew that I didn't want to live my life that way. I knew that watching how not speaking about things hindered you, that it was extremely important to always talk about it. It's okay to not be okay. That's the big thing that I feel like, you know, again, a lot of people don't really realize, like they haven't been given the chance to not be okay.
She's very mindful though. Like you can have a very honest conversation about it and the reality of it. Where a lot of the other family members is, yeah, it's, oh, you know, I put it in God's hands. But then you have my wife who, we talk about everything. Good, bad, or indifferent, man. Don't open your mouth unless you want to have a conversation about it. So, you know, words are very important. And, you know, if I say something, I better be ready to have a conversation about it. So that's the other side of it though, where we all talk. And there's a lot of great conversations that go on. So it's more also too, you get to like our generation, you know, past our parents' age, there's definitely a lot more, like my brother-in-law, Eric, like I can have some really good conversations. We all do, we all have open conversations. So this topic does come up because, you know, everybody's got their own little stuff that they deal with every day, and being able to call your brother-in-law and talk about it and not just, you know, they got to think like, hey, you're this guy that's got no problem. So that's one part I love, but then you take it a generation up or a generation after that, yeah, talking about it's just not something that is really spoken about. So I think with my wife, Erin, we'll call her EB, so we don't get Singerman and my wife, so we always call her EB. It's a few things, right? Because obviously having kids, you go through postpartum depression. So, you know, that's a whole nother topic because that's tough. I know a lot of people discount that, but that's a rough thing to see someone go through. And a lot of times maybe the symptoms don't show right away. It's something that can kick in like 6-9 months down the road. So, you know, there's someone who's experienced that. So for me, she's able to recognize changes in me or times where maybe I'm not fully engaged, or, you know, I've kind of have that, maybe there's probably, she can see it in me where I'm like maybe checked out, or maybe I'm not seeing it or verbalizing it. Because again, I came from a family where we didn't really talk about a whole lot of stuff. I don't think my dad, again, I love my dad to death, but I don't think he told me he loved me until I was in my 30s. Because he just didn't, you know what I mean? It just wasn't like that. Or say with my wife, we talk about everything. So if there's a problem, it gets brought up and we don't move on until it gets resolved. So, you know, there was a point in time where she's like, hey, you need to change. Like something needs to change about this situation or it's gonna be a much different conversation. And that's where I had to take an honest look in the mirror and be like, okay, something is going on. I have to deal with this. And then two, you know, a lot of stuff kind of came to the forefront for me too of, I guess, recognizing, because again, you could recognize something but not take action on it, or you can recognize and take action. That's a whole different thing. And I really think when Dallas passed it, that's where I had like a fundamental shift in taking action. Just because had such a impact on me, I was like, okay, I can't just bury this one because I felt like that's gonna cause this like emotional collateral damage I might not come back from. So it was in going to counseling for that is when I really became more self-aware of, like, yeah, I knew I always had some depression issues and I had like, you know, thoughts of suicide when I was younger, but where it all kind of came together and it's like, okay, this is really what's going on with me. And, you know, the fragmented thought processes and the impulsivity and, you know, like I always talk about, I'll tell people I have a fear of heights. I don't really have a fear of heights. I have a fear of impulsivity, of throwing myself off the edge of something at a high point because it's something in your head tells you to do it. I know it sounds crazy, but that's really where my fear of heights comes from because it's like this weird thing in my head that says, do it. Don't ask me why. So, you know, it's like actually saying, okay, I recognize something's going on here that's more than I can deal with on my own, that I can't just keep inside and keep trying to bury down because at some point that comes to a bad end. So, yeah, I mean, I think really for my wife, it's that she really provides that sense check for one, a voice of reason, and brutal honesty. And I don't, you know, and when I say brutal honesty, I don't mean it in a bad way. It's just, I'll get called to the carpet. Good, bad, or indifferent. Like I always say, like she saved my life in a lot of ways because if I would have kept living the lifestyle I was before I met her, who knows how my life would have ended in just like doing stupid shit. And, you know, she kind of like forced accountability with me. I couldn't, like other women, I could get away with bullshitting them. I couldn't bullshit a Southern African-American woman, so.
Because I knew when I met him that there's a lot more here. There's a lot more here than what you're telling me. But I was very much like, okay, I'm gonna let you tell me what you want to tell me. I walk into the room, I see a complete mess. I'm gonna go, okay. And you say to me, oh, I knocked over this glass of water. Cool. I'm gonna let you finish. I'm not gonna go, what happened there and how did that get on the ceiling? Okay, I'm gonna let you go as far as you wanna go. I'm gonna give you that space and that time that you need to be comfortable with telling me what you need to tell me. I'm not gonna push it. I'm not going to demand it. I'm not gonna, pull it out of you. But I'm gonna hold you accountable for taking care of whatever that one thing is that you've stepped up and admitted. Okay, cool. Let's pick this glass up and let's clean up this water.
So first, with Luke, anybody who maybe can't wrap their head around it, you might not be able to, and it's okay. It's okay that you might not be able to rationalize it. Could someone do this? Because nobody was in his shoes, nobody was in his head, nobody did, live the life he lived. So just be understanding and be supportive for his family that's left behind. But I guess the thing you could take away from it is, if you even remotely feel like, I think also too, if I back it up a little bit, I don't know if people's view of depression is what's been showed to them, or someone's like on a commercial, like crying, and it's like, it could just, they may never be like that. It's just something internal with them. So, it's not like this, like, oh, this person's constantly walking around sad. It's just something they may like bury down inside, and that's probably even more dangerous because nobody sees it. So I guess for me, the biggest takeaway is like, if you feel any of that, if if any of this I say like somewhat resonates with you, man, just like talk to someone. I mean, could you just talk to a friend or family member first? And if, something where it leads to more questions, there's nothing wrong with making an appointment with a counselor to talk to them, because again, they're just a sounding board. I remember because some of the feelings I had, first time I went to a therapist, because I was like, man, I was like, is there a way to figure out, am I schizophrenic? Because the way my thought process was. And it's like, no, you're not, but it's more of like depression along this line. So, I mean, it's okay to ask questions, it's okay to talk to someone. And I think that's the biggest thing is, if you feel anything or you have questions, it's just seeking out to talk to someone, because there's nothing wrong with a conversation, right? I joked around yesterday, like, asking someone out or doing something that you never is unknown. What's the worst thing? Someone could say no. But in this situation, okay, maybe it just leads to more questions. You know what I mean? You have a conversation, and with depression, you're probably never going to get a very specific answer, because everybody's it's individual, it manifests different. And the thing I guess to understand is it's an ongoing conversation. It's not something that you go to a doctor like, you have a upper respiratory and you take a Z-Pack and away you go. This is something that you're always going to have to work on. It's just like a marriage. You're always working on it. It's always evolving. You're always having to put time into it. It's not just something that goes away. It's the same thing with medication. You're not going to just take a pill and all of a sudden depression's gone. It's just treating a symptom of it typically. So, and again, some people may need that. But I think it all just starts with a conversation, and it's like, if you have any of this resonates, it's okay, I'd say start a conversation about it.